Okay, you've dialed into topic 4. This is the tender period and pre-contract administration topic, part of the Building Contract Administration study guide. Again, as I said in the previous topic, this is additional to the study guide. This is not a replacement of those notes, and hopefully it summarises and assists you in a different way to understand some of the more important aspects of contract administration, and I'll try and put some diagrams and easy to follow sort of examples in here, but in fairly limited detail, but a little bit of discussion to further help you along. Okay, let's go for it. The tender period, and here we can see the tender process. Simple process really from the left to the right of your screen, and it does get difficult. Having said that, though, when you've got several tenders for the same type of trade or resource and you're trying to close them at different durations, some are finishing, some are starting, so there's a lot of paperwork, schedules, a lot of standard documentation that you have to have in place along with the filing. If you haven't got this in place, and if you haven't got the communication correct with every builder, subcontractor and supplier, then you can really have huge ramifications. Most of those ramifications are cost. It will be also time, but that will come back to, again, cost. Remember, the tender going out is a selling instrument to every builder, contractor and supplier, so that communication must be consistent to all. The method of tendering will vary from the scale of works, say a small project of 80,000 to 300 million, but this simple process from the left to the right of the screen, the detail here, the workflow, is exactly the same, and that's the way it needs to be approached. Documentation procedure, really important part of the process. The tender documentation itself needs to be clear and concise. All of the tender documents are important when coming to finalise the tender, and what I've often done is kept a schedule of all of those particular types of information, tender documents, contract drawings, the amendments, special conditions and so forth. I've kept a schedule of those for each particular trade package and supplier, and made it very clear that they've actually gone out to each one, that it's understood, and that it's actually come back, and that they've actually aware of what was in the package as well. Blank tender forms completed, copies of schedules of rates, and relevant information as well that's particular to the site. Bills of quantities and pricing of instructions and tenderers as well. So the flow of the information in that tender documentation, it's really important, and that's another critical part of communicating back out to the builder and contractor and supplier, and then communicating back to you exactly what it is that's required. They've actually understood exactly what it is and priced it and given it the resource and time that you require to get the project up and running. Let's also consider the tender strategies here before we get too far in the documentation. There's 4 main types of strategies that we can use going out to tender with the documents and asking or calling for prices. And they vary really on the amount of time that's available, the specialty of the project at hand. How specialist is that? If it's a specialist project, we might be looking at selective or invited tenders. If it's a form of contract that we believe that we can get a very competitive price at the moment, we might go out to more of an open tender. Government might go out for more of an open tender as well. Having said that, if it's an environment that we know the builder's involved, and that it's something that we already have some idea of their financial situation, their background, their quality of work. We've worked with them in the past. We're getting a good feedback and advice from other people in the industry. We might go directly to a building contractor and negotiate directly with them. They all have a lot of advantages and disadvantages with how you intend to use them in regards to the amount of time in that tender process. So negotiation at one end, there is some advantages there with regards to getting the project up and running, and also having some real good comfort in knowing what that builder is all about. Having said that, we've lost a bit of the competitive edge though, possibly when it comes to pricing variations and looking ahead with that project if you compare it directly with open tendering. The calling and the receiving of the tenders. Now, there's a few things here. This procedure needs to be really sound. The timetable needs to be very clear. The timetable also will reflect, I suppose, again, the amount of activity out there at the moment, and people that are available to price as well. If it's a really strong market and everybody's quite busy, they're really not going to price a project in a few days. And also the magnitude of the project, the difficulty of the project. Does it need site visits and further investigation by the contractor as a part of his pricing? So all those issues need to be taken into consideration. The documents themselves, again, that information needs to be very clear that it went out and that the information has come back. So there's a lot of issues in here which really need the process is lengthy, but good contract administration skill procedure is extremely important. As I mentioned earlier, the duration of calling the tenders will vary, and this simple matrix here demonstrates that from a simple project up to a very, very large project. So it's something to be aware of, the length of time that tenders need to be open, need to be out there. So looking at the size, complexity, the level of the documentation, as I said earlier, site visits, and in some cases presentations need to be considered by the contractor or the builder. The other issue here with calling for tenders is again deciding on the number of tenders, particularly on specialty projects, and the amount of resources that will be available at the time when you're calling the tender, to have all those points very clear before going out to tender. Nothing worse than calling a tender and having one price come back conforming. So it's very important. Once you get a number of tenders coming back conforming, then you can consider it successful. Once you go through the evaluation process, you've done your matrix, again, then you can look at real comparison of pricing and whether we're getting value for money on this project. The closing of the tenders are a very important process, and again, from a contract administrator's point of view, needs a little bit of homework to get this right. Make sure that tender closing time doesn't conflict with any public holidays or any periods where there's likely to be difficulties for the contractors and suppliers to get prices themselves for you, and also that it's at a time of the day or the week which you know that they're not going to have troubles trying to drop off the tenders. At the tender, you need a fairly clear tender opening procedure where they're opened immediately, the witness, location of the tender box, where that is, and whether it's public, private or confidential as well. Also a procedure and a process for receiving late tenders, whether you will accept them or not. In most cases it's good not to accept them, but all those processes need to be made very clear to all the tenderers at the point of tendering, so that most of the time I make sure all those points are very clear on the initial tender invite letter, and they're in bold, so everybody's aware of them and there's no misunderstanding. Another issue with tender closing, I've quite often found it's very useful to have either a ring around or an email broadcast to the tenderers, just to ensure that they are on track, that they are able to meet the tender closing date, and furthermore that they are still keen and eager to submit a conforming tender. That's another useful contract administration procedure, which actually reconfirms to yourself that out of the 10 that you've called, you're going to get about 8 to 10. You're not going to end up with one because it wasn't clear on the tender date. People missed it. People were had more important projects to attend to, and they've just forgotten about yours. So that's another good process to have in place. Once the tenders are in, the tender analysis and evaluation has to begin. I've listed here those more important headings to put in your evaluation matrix. A rating system is extremely important with this as well. Some of these issues are going to be more important to you than others, and some have got more contractual risk than others as well, and as a result then there's a commercial involvement there as well. My tip on this is to build a simple tender evaluation matrix in Excel. And it's not usually the same for each project, but some of these will rate higher and lower from project to project. So a simple tender evaluation matrix in Excel might look something like this, and I think the most important issue here is the section, the weighting of each of those. As I said, they'll vary. The risk or importance of each of those varies from project to project, not usually from trade to trade or subcontract to subcontract, but that is an important issue to consider with the evaluation process. Also, the evaluation items on the left, they'll vary too, depending on project to project. Some of those items and issues might be things like access. It might be things like public relations. It could be a number of different things on how this project is specific. It's got a lot of a coordination with the general public as a result of a rebuild at a certain place, and so there's other elements that you want to tease out from the evaluation and get out from the contractor that they've got experience in this and they're actually good at it. So this evaluation matrix is a good way to look at that on one piece of paper and, or on the screen, and be clear in your own mind that you've made the right decision, that this is the best value contractor for the project. A part of the evaluation process is still looking at the bills of quantities. If it's a project where there is a bill of quantities, or at least there's a schedule of rate, a scope of works, that form of schedule that you can compare apples with each contractor, with each supplier, with each subcontractor. And this is an extremely important part of the process. From this, you can pick up items which some contractors and suppliers have missed, and some of those items being missed, or maybe they've been included, excluded. So we want to ensure that everything is the same. Every contractor is priced the same thing, that they're looking at it in the same possible light, and that if there's any deficiencies in that documentation, well, it's clear that all of them have made that assumption or some haven't. And so it brings the price back to a common, I should say, the scope. It means that they've priced it at the same denominator, the same pricing denominator. Okay, after the tender analysis and evaluation, it's now time to make a recommendation to the client based on that analysis, and at the same time, be clear with all the other tenderers, notify them that they were unsuccessful in this particular instance, and also thank them for being a part of the tender process, because it's important that they've put in a fair amount of time and effort to obviously help them with future potential work, but that's also helping you along as well. The letter of intent, and the letter of intent, make sure that it's clear with those important contract details and anything else that you need before the contract starts and before they start work on site as well. We're now at the end of topic 4, and it's time now to review this topic and read through the study guide, refer to the subject text and course text, and work through the workbook activities for this topic 4. If you've got any questions, you can post them to the student forum or email me directly.